HOA, Karen shot my girl for breaking her rules. Minutes later, she arrest. The gunshot split the air like lightning striking glass. One deafening bang. And my world fell apart. My little girl collapsed onto the pavement, her pink backpack slipping from her shoulder, scattering pencils across the concrete. The sound of her cry, soft, confused, and terrified, will haunt me forever. Across the street stood Karen, our HOA president, gripping a smoking pistol in her trembling hands, shouting, "She broke the rules. She broke the rules again." Neighbors froze mid-step. Someone screamed. Another dropped a coffee mug, the shatter echoing through the cul-de-sac. My knees hit the ground as I rushed to my daughter, her small body trembling, blood seeping through her shirt. "No, no, no, stay with me, baby," I whispered, pressing my hand over the wound, my voice breaking. Karen kept rambling, her voice cracking between rage and panic. I warned her. I told her not to step on my lawn again. Her words hit like knives, cold, senseless, cruel. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. My daughter's eyes fluttered, her lips whispering, "Daddy, it hurts." And as I held her in my arms, everything went quiet. The world faded into a heartbeat of rage, grief, and disbelief. Karen thought this was about rules, about control, but she had just crossed a line no rulebook could save her from. Because this wasn't just a shooting. It was the moment an entire community would never forget. Hey, everyone, before we dive into this heartbreaking story, I want to take a moment to talk to you human to human. Wherever you're watching from, whether it's a small, quiet town, a busy city, or a neighborhood where everyone knows each other, pause for a second and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? It always amazes me to see how far these stories reach, how many of you from all across the country come together to listen, to feel, and to remember that some lessons come at the cost of heartbreak. Now, before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that behind every house, every smiling face, every perfect community, there are people fighting silent battles. Because what you're about to hear today isn't just another HOA story. It's not about fences, lawns, or parking rules. It's about power, arrogance, and what happens when someone decides their rules matter more than someone else's life. This story will take you into the heart of a quiet suburban street that turned into a crime scene. It'll show you how a woman obsessed with control, known to her neighbors as HOA Karen, took authority too far, and how her arrogance ended in flashing red and blue lights, handcuffs, and tears. So take a deep breath. This one's going to hurt, because what happened on that sunny morning changed everything for one family, and it's a reminder to all of us. No rule, no title, and no HOA law is ever worth the human life. Now, let's begin. The sound of that gunshot didn't just echo through the neighborhood. It carved itself into my soul. One moment, my daughter was laughing, talking about her art project, and the next, she was on the ground, her tiny frame trembling, the brightness in her eyes fading like a light at sunset. "Lily," I screamed, stumbling toward her, my shoes slipping on the blood pooling beneath her. I could barely breathe. Every second felt like an eternity. I pressed my hands to her side, trying to stop the bleeding, whispering, "Stay with me, sweetheart, stay with me," but her breaths were short, broken, and scared. And there she was, Karen Peterson, the so-called Queen of Brookstone Estates, standing in her perfectly ironed royal blue HOA shirt with the golden trim, her hair perfectly curled, even in chaos. The gun dangled in her right hand, smoke curling upward like a ghost of her mistake. Her lips trembled, but her voice didn't. "She broke the rules," Karen said, her tone sharp and defensive. "Your girl, she stepped on my lawn again. I told her before, I warned you all." I looked up at her, disbelief and fury mixing inside me like wildfire. "You shot her for stepping on your grass?" My voice was hoarse, my hands trembling as I tried to hold my daughter. "She's 12 years old, Karen." Karen's eyes darted between me, the neighbors, and the blood on the pavement. She started backing away, stammering. She was being disrespectful. She was provoking me. I felt threatened. Threatened. I roared. By a little girl? The crowd began forming, neighbors emerging from their driveways, phones out, faces pale. The whole street went silent except for Lily's soft whimpers and the faint echo of Karen's words. I warned her. One neighbor, Mrs. Grant, gasped, "Oh my God, she really shot her," while another whispered, "Call 911. Someone call 911. I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder, but time itself slowed. Lily's small hand clutched my wrist, weakly tugging. "Dad, it hurts," she whispered, her voice shaking. I leaned closer, brushing her hair from her face. "I know, baby, I know. Just hold on. Daddy's here. You're gonna be okay." But deep inside, fear was crawling through me. I could feel her pulse weakening beneath my fingers. Karen was pacing now, her gun finally slipping from her hand and clattering to the ground. "This is all wrong," she muttered, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to listen. They all need to follow the rules." "You call this rules?" I shouted, standing up. My voice echoed across the cul-de-sac. "You just shot a child." Karen looked up at me, her eyes full of something twisted. Not remorse, not fear, but defiance. "If people followed the HOA code, things like this wouldn't happen," she hissed. The crowd gasped. Before I could respond, police cars came screeching around the corner, lights flashing red and blue, sirens screaming through the quiet morning. Officers jumped out shouting commands. "Drop the weapon. Hands where we can see them." Karen froze, her arms rising slowly as an officer kicked the gun away from her feet. She started crying, loud, messy, dramatic. It was an accident. She came at me. She threatened me. Lies. Every word was a lie. I kept my focus on Lily. The paramedics arrived moments later, pushing through the crowd, their hands moving fast, pressure bandages for lines, oxygen masks. One of them looked up at me, his expression tense. "Sir, we need to move her now." "I'm coming with you," I said, my voice low but firm. He nodded. "Stay beside her, but don't interfere." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Lily's fingers reached out blindly, searching. I caught her hand and squeezed. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." They loaded her into the ambulance, and I climbed in after her. I looked back through the open doors just long enough to see Karen on her knees, surrounded by officers, her perfect hair now wild, her face streaked with tears and sweat. "You're going to jail for this," I said under my breath. As the doors closed, the street faded behind us, the chaos, the flashing lights, the neighbors filming. The siren wailed as we sped toward the hospital. Inside the ambulance, everything felt unreal. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the medic's calm but urgent voice, the oxygen mask fogging with every shallow breath Lily took. I held her hand tighter. "You're strong, baby. You're gonna make it. You hear me?" She looked at me weakly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Why did she hate us, Dad? I swallowed hard. How could I explain hatred to a 12-year-old? "Some people think rules are more important than kindness," I said softly. "But they're wrong." When we reached the hospital, the doors flew open. Nurses rushed out with a gurney, shouting codes and instructions. Gunshot wound, abdomen shallow pulse, get her to trauma. They pushed her through the double doors. I followed until a nurse stopped me. "Sir, you can't go in there. Please wait outside." I tried to fight it. "That's my daughter." "I know, sir, but we need space to work." The doors shut, leaving me alone in the hallway, covered in blood that wasn't mine. My knees felt weak. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat down on a cold plastic chair and buried my face in my palms. Then the reality hit me. Karen had done this. Over a lawn. Over a stupid rule. And the worst part? I'd seen it coming. For months, she'd been picking fights with everyone, issuing fines, harassing neighbors, sending threats for minor violations. But she'd always targeted us more. Maybe because I stood up to her once at an HOA meeting. Maybe because she didn't like how my daughter laughed freely, played music on the porch, or drew chalk art on the sidewalk. I remembered that meeting, the way Karen slammed her clipboard on the table and said, "This community runs on order, not chaos. If people don't follow the rules, we lose everything." And when I told her she was being unreasonable, she leaned in close and whispered, "You'll regret crossing me." At the time, I thought she was bluffing. Now, as I sat outside that trauma room, hearing machines beep and doctors shout commands, I realized Karen's version of order came with a bullet. Minutes later, I saw police officers arrive at the hospital, their radios crackling. One of them, Officer Martinez, recognized me immediately. "Sir," he said, "the shooter's in custody. We have her at the scene. She's claiming self-defense." Self-defense. I snapped. "From a child." He sighed. "We'll get to the bottom of it, but we're going to need your statement soon." I nodded slowly, eyes burning. "You'll get it. Every detail." As he walked away, I stared through the glass window into the trauma room. Lily lay still under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers trying to keep her alive. I pressed my hand to the glass, whispering, "Please, God, don't take her from me." And in that moment, I made a silent vow. Karen Peterson thought she could hide behind her rules, behind her title, behind her fake tears. But she was about to learn that when you hurt a child, my child, there's no rule in the world that can save you. Because this wasn't just an accident. This was war. 2 weeks before the shooting, our lives still felt normal, or at least as normal as they could be under Karen Peterson's watchful eyes. Brookstone Estates was one of those picture-perfect communities, green lawns, identical mailboxes, white fences trimmed like a military haircut. On the outside, it looked peaceful. But underneath, it was ruled by one woman, Karen. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the HOA. Every fence, every bush, every parked car somehow needed her approval. She carried her clipboard like it was a badge and treated every minor infraction like a federal crime. And for some reason, she had a special obsession with us. It started small. A friendly notice about the color of our front door. Then another about Lily's bike being left near the porch. Then a $75 fine because trash bins were visible from the street, even though it was trash pickup day. At first, I laughed it off. It's just Karen being Karen. I told my wife, Julia. Every neighborhood has one. Julia smiled weakly. Yeah, but most don't carry clipboards and threats. Lily would giggle, not fully understanding the tension. Dad, why doesn't Miss Karen like us? I never had a good answer. Maybe it was because we were the youngest family in a community full of retirees. Maybe it was because I refused to join her ridiculous HOA beautification committee. Or maybe Karen just needed someone to hate, and we were convenient targets. The real trouble began one Sunday morning. Lily was outside, barefoot on the lawn, chalking colorful butterflies on the sidewalk. She loved drawing, her imagination brighter than anything else on that street. But when Karen's silver SUV turned the corner, the joy on her face disappeared. Karen parked directly in front of our house, stepped out in her pressed blue HOA shirt with its golden trim, and strutted toward us like she was inspecting enemy territory. "Good morning," Julia said politely, though her tone carried exhaustion. Karen didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Lily's chalk art. "This," she said, pointing with her pen, "is vandalism. The HOA rules clearly state that all sidewalks must remain clear and uniform." Julia blinked. "It's chalk. It'll wash away with the next rain." Karen's smile was cold. "Rules are rules. I'll have to issue a warning." Lily's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, Miss Karen. I didn't mean to." But Karen cut her off. "Children must be supervised when outside. This neighborhood has standards." That's when I stepped forward, wiping my hands on my jeans. "She's a kid drawing butterflies, not graffiti. How about you relax?" Karen turned to me, her lips tightening. "Mr. Hayes, I don't appreciate your tone. As HOA president, it's my duty to maintain order. If you have a problem, you can take it up with the board." "The board?" I said with a bitter laugh. "You are the board." Her eyes flashed. "That attitude," she said slowly, "is exactly why this community is falling apart." Then, without another word, she scribbled something on her notepad, tore the page off, and shoved it into my hand. "HOA violation notice. sidewalk defacement, immediate cleanup required. I crumpled it in my fist. You're unbelievable. Karen leaned in just close enough to whisper, "Careful, Mr. Hayes. You don't want to start something you can't finish." That was the first time I saw it, the darkness behind her smile. After that day, things escalated. Karen started sending emails, long condescending ones, about our failure to comply with community standards. One morning, we woke up to find a yellow sticker slapped on our mailbox. Final notice. Julia wanted to report her to the city, but I stopped her. That's exactly what she wants, I said, to pull us into her game. But what I didn't know was that Karen wasn't just playing a game anymore. She was keeping score. 3 nights later, around 8 p.m., we were eating dinner when the doorbell rang. Lily ran to answer, but I stopped her. Through the window, I saw Karen's silhouette, rigid, motionless, clipboard in hand. I opened the door, my patience already thin. What now? Karen's expression was tight, almost triumphant. You've been warned multiple times about your outdoor lighting. Section 5B, no colored bulbs allowed. Those blue string lights are in violation. I stared at her. They're for Christmas. It's October, she said flatly. Remove them by tomorrow or face a fine. Julia stood behind me, her voice trembling with frustration. Karen, it's a small decoration. It's not hurting anyone. Karen smirked. Rules don't bend for emotions. And that's when Julia said the one thing that would seal everything. You don't need rules, Karen. You need help. Karen froze, her face twisting as if Julia had slapped her. Excuse me? You heard me, Julia said. You don't run this neighborhood. You terrorize it. Karen's lips curled into a chilling smile. You'll regret saying that. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like gunshots against the pavement. That was the last time I saw her calm. In the days that followed, it felt like Karen was everywhere, watching, waiting. Our security camera caught her standing across the street at midnight, staring at our house. When I confronted her about it at the next HOA meeting, she denied it. You're paranoid, she said, grinning. Maybe you should focus less on me and more on following the rules. People laughed nervously. No one dared to challenge her. By then, I'd started keeping records, screenshots, letters, timestamps. Something in me knew it was only a matter of time before she went too far. Then came that fateful morning. Lily had just come home from school. Julia was helping her unpack her backpack while I was leaving for work. Lily wanted to pick the flowers from our front garden, her little morning ritual before homework. But as she stepped over the short white border of our yard, Karen appeared from nowhere. Hey, stay off my property, she shouted from across the street, storming toward her. Lily froze. I'm sorry, I didn't. Karen raised her voice, her face red. Don't you talk back to me. I've warned your family again and again. You people don't listen. Julia came out, raising her hands. Karen, calm down. She's a kid. She didn't even touch your lawn. Karen ignored her. This is exactly what I meant. This lack of discipline. This chaos. She turned to Lily. You don't belong in this neighborhood if you can't follow rules. Julia stepped between them. Back off, Karen. You've done enough. Karen's jaw clenched. You think you can threaten me? You think you can talk to me like that? And then, in one chilling, unforgettable second, Karen's hand went into her purse. No one saw the gun until it was too late. The next sound was the one that still wakes me up at night. Bang! The scream that followed didn't even sound human. Lily's body jerked back, Julia's hands caught her mid-fall, and the world shattered around us. Later, when the police investigated, they found Karen's handwritten notes, pages filled with angry rants about disrespectful neighbors, ungrateful children, and rules that must be enforced. But none of that mattered in the moment. All that mattered was the image burned into my mind. My little girl on the ground, Karen's gun smoking in the sunlight, and the quiet horror of realizing that some people don't just enforce rules. They kill for them. The sound of sirens still echoes in my head. It started faint, then louder, until the whole neighborhood glowed red and blue. The flashing lights danced across the houses like ghosts. Neighbors who used to gossip over lawn care now stood frozen in shock. The world they thought was safe suddenly painted in blood and disbelief. Karen Peterson stood in the middle of the street, her HOA clipboard lying forgotten beside the gun she had just dropped. She wasn't crying anymore. She was breathing fast, staring at her trembling hands, muttering under her breath. I warned them. I told them. They never listened. Her words cut through me like glass. I was on my knees beside Lily, my hands shaking, my shirt soaked in her blood. The paramedics worked around me, their voices clipped and urgent. We've got a pulse, weak but present. Get her on the gurney now. I barely noticed the officers shouting commands at Karen. Ma'am, hands up, step away from the weapon. She flinched like she was waking up from a dream, then lifted her hands slowly, eyes darting between me, the officers, and the neighbors filming everything on their phones. I didn't mean to. She just kept talking back. Karen screamed. She disrespected me in my own neighborhood. One officer, a tall man with a sharp jawline, moved in fast, pulling her arms behind her back and snapping the cuffs in place. You're under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, he said firmly. Karen twisted her head toward him, eyes wild. It's not assault. It's self-defense. She threatened me. That girl. The officer's patience ran out. Enough. You shot a 12-year-old. The entire cul-de-sac went silent. You could feel the disbelief, the rage, the collective heartbreak. Karen's voice cracked. You don't understand. I had to protect myself. Another officer bent down and picked up her gun with a gloved hand, bagging it as evidence. Ma'am, this is a registered firearm in your name. Nobody attacked you. Karen tried to twist free. No, you're making a mistake. I'm the HOA president. I'm in charge here. Those words, I'm in charge here, would later become infamous on every news channel in the state. I remember watching her being dragged toward the squad car, kicking and crying, still shouting about her rules. You'll all regret this, she screamed. I built this neighborhood. You're nothing without me. Her voice faded as the door slammed shut, but I wasn't watching anymore. I was inside the ambulance with Lily, my hand gripping hers, so tight my knuckles turned white. Her little fingers were cold, trembling, her lips pale. The paramedic beside me kept repeating, "Stay with us, sweetheart. You're doing great." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. When we reached the hospital, everything blurred. Bright lights, doctors shouting, machines beeping. They rushed her through the ER doors, and someone stopped me again. Sir, we'll take care of her. Please wait outside. I wanted to fight, to kick down the doors, to scream. But my legs gave out, and I just stood there, frozen in the hallway, covered in my daughter's blood. Minutes felt like hours. Then Officer Mitchell, one of the responding officers, walked in. His face was pale, his eyes heavy. Mr. Hayes? I turned toward him, my voice hollow. Where is she? They're doing everything they can, he said carefully. I just wanted to update you. The suspect's been taken into custody. She's claiming self-defense, but the neighbor's footage says otherwise. Footage? He nodded. One of your neighbors had a doorbell camera pointed toward the street. It caught the whole thing. A spark of hope flickered inside me. Then you can prove she's lying. Yes, sir, he said, but it's going to take time. The press is already swarming the scene. We'll need your statement as soon as you're ready. I looked past him through the small glass window where I could still see the shadow of my daughter's bed. I'll give it, every detail, but not until I know she's alive. He nodded quietly. Of course, sir. As he walked away, I collapsed onto a bench, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Every breath felt like broken glass. I tried to focus on anything else, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the sound of wheels rolling down the hall, but my mind kept flashing back to Karen's face. That look of righteousness, that calm certainty that what she did was justified. How do you reason with someone like that? Someone who believes her power is law? Then the doors to the trauma room opened, and a nurse stepped out, her gloves stained red. She looked at me, her face heavy with exhaustion. She's stable, she said softly, but she's not out of danger. I nearly collapsed in relief. Can I see her? Just for a moment. I followed her in. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of a monitor. Lily lay on the bed, her chest rising slowly beneath a thin blanket. Tubes and wires surrounded her like a battlefield of hope. I sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You're so strong, baby," I whispered. "You keep fighting, okay? Daddy's right here." Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't speak. That moment broke me. I wasn't the district attorney anymore. I wasn't the man who argued law and justice in courtrooms. I was just a father, powerless, terrified, clinging to the only thing that mattered. Outside, the chaos grew louder. Reporters filled the hospital parking lot. Headlines were already spreading online. HOA president shoots 12-year-old girl in rules dispute. Neighborhood leader claims self-defense. Witnesses say shooting was unprovoked. The story had gone national before the night ended. When I stepped outside to call my wife, who'd been visiting her mother that weekend, I saw the press crowding the entrance, microphones flashing, voices shouting questions. "Mr. Hayes, is it true your daughter was shot over lawn dispute? Will you be pursuing charges personally? Do you believe the HOA president acted in self-defense?" I said nothing. My silence was louder than any statement I could have made, because deep down, I already knew what I was going to do. 2 hours later, back at the station, Karen was sitting in an interrogation room, calm, collected, and rehearsed. The cameras showed her leaning back, arms crossed. "She disobeyed me," she said to the detective. "She kept walking on my property. I warned her. I told her parents." I felt threatened. "Threatened by a child?" the detective asked. Karen's tone hardened. "You weren't there. You don't know what it's like trying to keep order when no one listens. They mocked me. They laughed at me. I had to show them I wasn't weak." That line chilled every officer in that room. Hours later, she was charged with attempted murder and denied bail. But for me, it wasn't enough. Not yet, because this wasn't just a crime. It was a message, a brutal reminder that people like Karen hide behind titles and committees to justify cruelty. And the worst part? She believed she was right. That night, as I sat beside Lily's hospital bed, holding her small hand under the sterile white light, I made myself a promise. No matter what it took, no matter how long it took, I would make sure Karen Peterson never hurt anyone again. And the next time she looked into my eyes, she wouldn't see a grieving father. She'd see the man who was about to end her reign. The first night in the hospital was the longest night of my life. Every sound made me jump, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway, the soft hum of machines keeping my daughter alive. I sat beside Lily's bed, my hands still stained with dried blood, whispering silent prayers between breaths I could barely take. She looked so small under the blanket. A dozen tubes ran into her arms, oxygen lines wrapped gently around her nose, her skin pale against the hospital white. Every few minutes, I reached out just to touch her hand, to remind myself she was still here, still fighting. When dawn crept in through the blinds, painting the room in a dull orange glow, a nurse entered quietly. "She made it through the night," she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "That's a good sign." I nodded, my voice breaking. "Thank you." But even as she spoke, I knew the real fight had just begun. By the second day, the hospital was surrounded by reporters. Cameras lined the parking lot. Satellite vans filled the street. The world had found its villain, HOA Karen, the woman who shot a child for breaking her rules. The headlines spread like wildfire. Community horror. HOA president shoots 12-year-old in rule dispute. Every channel, every news feed, every podcast was talking about it. Clips of Karen being handcuffed replayed on a loop, her words immortalized. "She disrespected me. I'm the president here." But what the cameras didn't capture was the silence in my house. The way it echoed without laughter, without Lily's singing, without peace. My wife, Julia, hadn't left the hospital since she arrived. Her hands never stopped shaking, and every time Lily stirred, Julia's eyes filled with tears. "This can't be real," she whispered. "She's just a little girl." I didn't have an answer, because nothing about it felt real. That same afternoon, Detective Ramos, the officer leading the investigation, came to the hospital to speak with me. His face was serious, but not cold. "Mr. Hayes, I know this is difficult," he said, pulling out a small recorder, "but I need to ask you some questions." "Go ahead," I said quietly. He clicked the recorder on. "You said you'd had prior conflicts with Mrs. Peterson?" I nodded. "For months. She fined us for everything. A wreath on our door, Lily's bike, the color of our mailbox. She threatened eviction twice. I thought she was just obsessed with control. Did she ever threaten physical violence?" I hesitated. "Not directly. But her words, they always carry that weight. She told me once, 'People like you are the reason neighborhoods collapse.'" Ramos leaned forward. "We've reviewed the doorbell footage. It clearly shows your daughter standing still. She didn't cross her lawn. Your wife stepped forward to defend her, but she never touched Karen." My jaw clenched. "So, she can't claim self-defense anymore?" He shook his head. "No, sir. The video makes it clear. This was no accident." I let out a shaky breath. "Then she'll go to prison." Ramos paused. "Eventually, yes. But there's something else you should know." He slid a photo onto the table, a snapshot from Karen's house. It showed a corkboard covered in pictures. Mailboxes houses people. In the center, pinned with a red string, was our family photo. "She was keeping track of you," Ramos said. "Notes, letters, complaints. She'd been fixating on your family for months. I think this was personal." I stared at that board until my vision blurred. Every word, every threat, every sneer, it all made sense now. Karen wasn't protecting rules. She was feeding her obsession. 2 days later, Karen's attorney filed her plea. Not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. Insanity. The word sent a cold anger through me. She wasn't insane. She was deliberate, methodical, and cruel. The local news tried to paint both sides. Some anchors called her a woman under pressure. Others called her a danger to society. But the truth was simple. Karen had built her identity around power. And when someone dared to defy her, she snapped. By the third day, my phone was flooded with messages, journalists asking for statements, activists calling for reform, strangers sending prayers. But none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the girl sleeping in that hospital bed. And when she finally opened her eyes on the fourth morning, the world stopped. "Hey, sweetheart," I whispered, leaning forward. "You're awake." Her lips quivered. "Dad." I took her hand, tears burning my eyes. "Yeah, baby, I'm right here." She blinked slowly, confusion clouding her face. "Did I do something bad?" "Miss Karen said I broke the rules." My throat tightened. No. You didn't do anything wrong, Lily. You're the bravest girl I've ever known." Her eyes filled with tears. She looked so mad. "I know, honey, but she can't hurt you anymore." That was the first time I'd felt hope in days. Meanwhile, the investigation uncovered even more. Ramos called me one evening to share the findings. Karen had an entire binder of HOA complaints, he said, but yours were different. She wrote comments next to each notice, personal comments. Things like they think they're better than me, and that child needs discipline. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was targeting you. I clenched the phone, my jaw tight. "So, this was planned." "Yes, but it's more than that. We found something else." He hesitated before continuing. Her husband, or ex-husband, filed a restraining order against her 3 years ago. She had a record of aggression. She lost her teaching job after threatening a student. A silence stretched between us. "How?" I said, finally. "Did no one stop her before this?" Ramos sighed. "Because people like her hide behind titles. They play nice until they don't." I hung up, staring out the hospital window. Below, the city lights blinked faintly in the distance, a reminder that life went on for everyone else. For me, time had stopped. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her plead insanity. I wasn't going to let her manipulate another courtroom. If it took every ounce of strength I had, I would make sure justice didn't slip away behind loopholes and sympathy. A week later, the hospital released Lily. The doctors called her recovery a miracle. She had scars now, both seen and unseen, but she smiled when she saw home again. The neighborhood looked different, quieter. The grass on Karen's lawn was overgrown, her house sealed with police tape. The community sign that once read, "Proud to be part of Brookstone Estates," had been vandalized overnight. Someone had spray-painted one word across it, "Monsters." As we pulled into the driveway, neighbors stepped outside. Some waved shyly, others avoided eye contact. Shame hung in the air, because deep down they knew. They'd all seen Karen's behavior. They just hadn't spoken up. Julia squeezed my hand. "She's gone," she said softly. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not yet. Because justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. And the truth was, Karen's power had come from silence, from people too afraid to confront her. That silence was over now. I looked across the street at her dark, empty house and whispered, "You wanted control, Karen. But now you've lost everything." That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Dad, will she go to jail?" I hesitated, brushing her hair gently. "Yes, baby. She will." "Good," she said softly. "Then maybe other people will be safe too." Her words hit deeper than she'd ever know, because in that moment I realized this story wasn't just ours anymore. It was a warning, and I intended to make sure the whole world heard it. The courthouse smelled like old paper and tension. It had been 3 months since the shooting, 3 months of sleepless nights, hospital visits, therapy sessions, and waiting for justice. Lily had healed physically, though the faint scar across her side told a story that would never fade. Emotionally, we were still rebuilding. Some nights, she woke up crying from nightmares. Other nights, she'd whisper, "Dad, promise me she can't hurt us again." And I'd promise, every single time. Now, sitting inside that courtroom, I intended to keep that promise. Karen Peterson sat at the defense table, her once perfect posture wilted, but her arrogance intact. Her golden-trimmed blue HOA shirt had been replaced by a gray suit, but her eyes still carried that same venom, the kind that made her believe she was untouchable. Her lawyer, a slick man named Gerald Lane, adjusted his tie and smiled smugly at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is not a story of malice. It's a tragedy, a misunderstanding. My client, Mrs. Peterson, acted out of fear, not hatred. Fear. That word made my stomach twist. The prosecutor, a young but sharp woman named Madison Clark, stood and faced the jury. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of conviction. "The defense will ask you to believe this was fear," she said, "but the evidence will show it was pride. It was ego. It was obsession with control. And it almost cost a child her life." Every eye in the room turned toward Karen. She shifted uncomfortably, crossing her arms. I watched her closely. The way her jaw tightened whenever the prosecutor spoke her name, the faint twitch in her fingers when the phrase HOA president was mentioned, she wasn't remorseful. She was angry that her power had been taken from her. The first witness was Officer Ramos. He described the scene in detail. The blood, the smoke, the trembling hands of a child, and the defiant woman who insisted she'd done nothing wrong. "She showed no sign of panic or regret," he said. "Her first words were, 'She broke the rules.'" The prosecutor nodded. "And did you find any weapon or threat on the victim or her family?" "None," Ramos replied. "The girl was unarmed. She was holding a backpack and a few flowers." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the jurors looked horrified. Karen's lawyer stood. "Officer, is it true that my client appeared distraught when you arrived?" Ramos's eyes narrowed. She appeared angry, not distraught. The tension in the room tightened. Next came the medical examiner, describing the bullet wound, a clean shot through the abdomen, fired from less than 10 feet away. Intentional, not accidental. Then came the neighbors. Mrs. Grant testified first, her voice trembling but strong. "Karen always said she'd teach them a lesson. We thought she was just being dramatic. None of us thought she meant it literally." A man named Paul Jenkins followed, holding up a printed email. She sent this to everyone in the HOA mailing list 2 days before the shooting, he said. If they don't start respecting the rules, I'll handle it myself. The defense lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. When the prosecutor displayed the email on the screen, you could almost hear the air leave the room. Karen's face reddened. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering furiously. He waved her off, clearly rattled. Then came the footage. The prosecutor dimmed the lights and played the doorbell video on the big screen. The entire courtroom went silent. There was Lily, small and smiling, stepping over the curb with her flowers. Julia stood behind her, calm but protective. And then Karen, storming into frame, yelling, gesturing, pointing at the ground like it was sacred land. You people think the rules don't apply to you, she screamed in the video. You've been warned. Julia raised her hands. Karen, stop. She's a child. And then bang. The shot echoed through the speakers, followed by the muffled scream of my wife and the sound of Lily collapsing. The video froze on Karen's face, twisted with rage. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of that sound hung over every person in the room. When the lights came back on, Karen looked smaller somehow, the air around her deflated. The defense lawyer stood hesitantly. Ladies and gentlemen, this video, while tragic, doesn't capture my client's state of mind. She felt cornered, provoked, overwhelmed. The prosecutor interrupted sharply. She was holding a gun, Mr. Lane. The only person cornered was a 12-year-old child. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Then, the prosecutor called her final witness. Mrs. Peterson's own words will tell you who she really is, she said. We call Exhibit 47. The screen lit up again, this time showing handwritten notes recovered from Karen's office. Pages filled with obsessive rants. The Hayes family is ruining everything. That child mocks me with her attitude. They need to be taught respect. If no one else enforces order, I will. Karen buried her face in her hands as the prosecutor read each line. Does that sound like fear? Madison asked the jury. Or does it sound like hatred disguised as authority? No one answered. They didn't need to. After the evidence was presented, the judge announced a short recess. I stepped outside to breathe. The hallway was filled with whispers, cameras flashing from a distance, and people shaking their heads. A woman approached me, someone I didn't recognize. I live 2 streets away, she said softly. We all knew she was dangerous. We just never thought she'd go that far. I'm so sorry we didn't speak up. I nodded. It's not your fault. But silence is what let her feel powerful. When I turned to walk back in, I caught a glimpse of Karen through the glass, sitting alone at the defense table, staring at the floor. For a fleeting second, I wondered if she finally understood the weight of what she'd done. But then she looked up, and I saw it. That same cold glint of defiance. No regret, only bitterness. Closing arguments came the next morning. The prosecutor stood first. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice steady. This case isn't about an HOA dispute. It's about power and how dangerous it becomes when left unchecked. A title doesn't give you the right to destroy lives. A rule book doesn't justify pulling a trigger. She looked toward Karen. You'll be asked to decide whether this was fear or fury. But you saw the video. You heard the words. And you know the truth. This was pride. This was cruelty. And it almost ended a child's life. Then came the defense's final plea. Lane paced before the jury, his tone desperate now. Mrs. Peterson isn't a monster. She's a woman who snapped under stress, a victim of her own responsibilities. Even the jury looked unconvinced. Finally, the judge turned to the jury foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. The silence stretched so thick you could feel every heartbeat in that room. On the charge of attempted murder, he said, voice clear and steady, we find the defendant, Karen Peterson, guilty. The words hit the air like thunder. Karen froze. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but the bailiff was already at her side. No, this isn't fair. I was right. I was just doing my job. But no one listened anymore. The courtroom had heard enough of her voice. As she was led away, her eyes met mine. For the first time, I didn't see power. I saw fear. Real, raw fear. And I felt nothing but relief. Outside the courthouse, the cameras swarmed again, reporters shouting questions. But all I said was this: justice isn't revenge. It's protection. My daughter can finally sleep without nightmares, and that's all that matters. I took Lily's hand as we walked down the courthouse steps, her small fingers gripping mine tight. "Is it over now, Dad?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," I said, my voice breaking. "It's over." But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished yet, not until the world understood how one woman's obsession with control nearly destroyed everything good in one small neighborhood. And that's when I realized this story had become more than just our pain. It had become a warning. 6 months passed since the verdict. 6 months since Karen Peterson was taken away in handcuffs, screaming about rules and order, while the cameras captured the fall of a woman who thought she could control the world around her. Brookstone Estates had changed, though not in the way she'd imagined. The lawns were still trimmed, the mailboxes still lined up perfectly, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't peace. It was awareness. It was people finally realizing how fragile that illusion of perfection really was. Karen's house sat empty, a hollow shell at the end of the cul-de-sac. Her once pristine garden had grown wild, the HOA president plaque rusting against the gate. The same neighbors who once nodded politely at her commands now crossed the street when they passed it. Her name had become a story, a cautionary tale told in whispers. Don't turn into another Karen. But for me, for my family, the healing had only just begun. Lily's laughter had returned. Soft, hesitant at first, then fuller each day. The first time she ran again through our yard, barefoot and smiling, I had to step inside to hide the tears. She looked so free, so fearless, the way children should be. Julia joined her moments later, barefoot too, laughing as they chased Bubbles across the driveway. The same driveway that once ran red. I watched them from the porch, coffee mug trembling in my hands, and realized something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from survival. We'd been through hell, but we made it out. The neighborhood held a memorial 2 weeks after the trial, not for Karen, but for every person who had suffered under her so-called leadership. Dozens of families gathered by the community fountain, lighting candles and sharing stories about what they'd endured. Fines, threats, humiliation. Mrs. Grant stood at the microphone, her voice shaking as she said, "We stayed quiet because we thought it was easier. We thought following her rules would keep the peace. But silence doesn't keep peace, it keeps power in the wrong hands." People nodded, some cried. Even the city mayor attended, announcing that Brookstone Estates HOA would be dissolved. The new sign that replaced the old one read, "This community belongs to its people, not its rules." Julia squeezed my hand as the crowd applauded. "She'd hate that sign," she whispered. I smiled faintly. Good. The months that followed brought a strange kind of fame. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, talk shows asking for appearances. I turned them all down, except for one. It was a local podcast that focused on justice reform. The host, Rachel Dean, was an old college friend who'd covered the story since day one. She didn't want drama. She wanted truth. When I sat in her studio surrounded by microphones and dim lights, she asked me, what made Karen so dangerous? Was it her gun or her authority? I thought for a moment before answering. Neither, I said. It was her belief that she was always right, that her rules mattered more than compassion, more than people. The moment someone starts thinking they're the law instead of living by it, that's when justice dies. Rachel nodded slowly. And what would you say to the people watching, the ones who feel trapped under someone like her? I looked into the microphone, imagining all the families out there, the ones afraid to speak, afraid to fight back. I'd tell them this, I said softly. Bullies hide behind order. They call it structure. They call it tradition. But cruelty dressed in authority is still cruelty. The only way it stops is when someone stands up and says, "No more." That episode went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. People from across the country sharing their own stories, their own Karens and rule enforcers. Some messages were heartbreaking. My HOA threatened to evict us for building a wheelchair ramp. Our president fines parents if kids play basketball in the street. Your story gave me courage to fight back. For the first time, I understood why this story mattered beyond my pain. It wasn't just about my daughter. It was about every voice that had been silenced by fear. Life slowly stitched itself back together. Lily started painting again. She called her newest piece Freedom, a bright swirl of blues and golds with a single flower growing in the middle. When I asked her what it meant, she said, "It's our house now. Without her." Julia smiled. "It's beautiful, baby." One evening, I found Lily sitting on the porch, looking across the street. "Dad," she said, "do you think Miss Karen's sorry?" I paused. The question caught me off guard. "I don't know." I admitted, "Maybe one day she will be. Maybe not." She nodded slowly. "I hope she learned something in jail. Maybe then she won't hurt anyone else." Her words reminded me of something Elena, my late wife, once said when she was alive. The goal of justice isn't revenge, it's prevention. And maybe that's what this whole ordeal had become. Not just punishment, but prevention. A warning to everyone who ever let their pride justify cruelty. 3 months later, a letter arrived in our mailbox. No return address. Just my name written neatly in blue ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You don't know me, but your story saved my sister. Our HOA president had been threatening her for months. She finally spoke out, and the board voted to remove him. Thank you for reminding us that no one is above the law." I sat on the porch for a long time holding that letter, feeling the weight of every word. For the first time, I realized that something good had come out of all this pain, a ripple that reached beyond our neighborhood. Karen's bullet might have started it, but it wouldn't define it. That night, I filmed a short video, not for fame, not for attention, but for everyone who had written to me. I sat on the same porch where it all began, the faint hum of crickets in the background, the porch light glowing softly above. I looked into the camera and said, "Hey, everyone. If you're watching this, you already know what happened. But I don't want to talk about Karen anymore. I want to talk about what comes next. This story isn't about rules or revenge. It's about standing up for what's right. So, if someone's trying to control you, silence you, or make you feel small, don't let them. Speak up. Protect what's yours. Protect who you love. Because silence is the weapon they count on." I paused, my voice breaking slightly. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or made you feel, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far Lily's courage travels. And don't forget to subscribe, because these stories aren't just stories, they're lessons. Let's make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else again. When I uploaded it, I didn't expect much, but within hours, the views climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from New York, Dallas, Seattle, and small towns I'd never heard of. People sharing their pain, their anger, their hope. The world was listening. As I turned off the porch light that night, I looked across the street one last time at the empty house. The windows were dark, the walls cold, but for the first time, it didn't scare me. Because that place no longer represented fear. It represented what happens when good people stay silent, and what can change when they finally speak. I whispered into the quiet, "You lost, Karen. Not because you went to prison, but because the people you tried to control learned to stand up." And as the wind rustled through the trees, I could almost hear another voice, softer, warmer, saying, "You did it. You made it mean something." I smiled, wiped my eyes, and went inside. Because justice, I finally understood, doesn't end in a courtroom. It lives on in every person brave enough to tell their story. If this story touched you, don't scroll away in silence. Type your city in the comments. Let the world know where you stand for justice. And if you believe kindness should always be stronger than cruelty, hit that subscribe button. Because together, we can make sure that no voice, no child, and no truth ever gets silenced again.